Han Seong-min had spent 52 years learning that the world was a series of transactions. As the head of the Han Syndicate for over 2.5 decades, he had mastered the art of the clean kill, not always with a blade, but with a contract, a whispered threat, or a well-placed bribe. He was a man of sharp suits, silver-streaked hair, and a heart that had been armored in ice since he was a boy. But in the year 2025, the ice was cracking. The first crack had appeared 3 months ago, when he'd attended the funeral of Kim Tae-ho, a rival boss who'd been gunned down outside a Seoul nightclub. As Seong-min stood among the mourners, he'd watched Tae-ho's 6-year-old daughter place a drawing on the casket, a stick-figure family with Daddy written in crayon. "She draws him every day," Tae-ho's widow had whispered to Seong-min. "She doesn't understand why he's not coming home." That night, Seong-min had stared at his own reflection and seen his father's face, the man who'd built the Han Syndicate with blood and brutality, who died alone in a hospital bed while his loyal associates divided his territory. The second crack came when he'd visited his brother's grave. Han Seong-jun had been the good son, the one who'd tried to legitimize the family business. He died in a car bombing meant for Seong-min, collateral damage in a war that never truly ended. That was 15 years ago. Seong-min was 37 then, still believing he could honor his brother's memory through power. "You should have been the one to inherit this," Seong-min had whispered to the headstone. "You would have made it something beautiful." Now, standing on the balcony of his Las Vegas penthouse, the desert wind tugging at his silk robe, Seong-min looked at the legal documents on his mahogany desk. His lawyers, Leonard Hayes and Margaret Liu, had been hounding him for weeks. His health was declining, but his soul was exhausted. His cousins, Han Soo-yeon and Daniel Han, were already circling his assets like vultures, waiting for a slip-up. They didn't love him. They loved the power he represented. At 52, Seong-min had everything a man could want, and nothing that mattered. "Is this it?" he whispered to the neon skyline. "A life spent building a kingdom for people who want me dead?" The call that changed everything came at 3 a.m. "Uncle Min." The voice belonged to Ji-woo, his 8-year-old nephew, the son of his executed brother. "The men said you're not my family anymore. They said you'll forget about me like you forgot about Papa." Seong-min's hand tightened on the phone. His cousins had gotten to the boy. They were using his own blood as ammunition. "Ji-woo, listen to me. They said Papa died because you don't really love anyone. Is that true, Uncle Min?" The line went dead. Seong-min stared at his reflection in the dark window. When had he become the monster children feared? When had the lines around his eyes become carved by cruelty instead of laughter? That night he pulled out his brother's last letter, the one he'd never answered. "Min, power without purpose is just well-dressed destruction. Find someone who sees your soul, not your signature, or we both die for nothing." Seong-min walked to his private safe and withdrew a small wooden box, the only thing he'd kept from his childhood. Inside was a photograph. 2 young boys building sandcastles on Busan Beach. Seong-jun was helping 5-year-old Seong-min repair a collapsed tower, both of them laughing. "I wanted to be good like you," Seong-min whispered to the photo, "but I only knew how to be strong." He thought about the empire he'd built over 27 years of leadership. Legitimate businesses mixed with shadow operations. Politicians in his pocket, judges who owed him favors, a network that spanned 3 continents. But what was it all for? His phone buzzed with a text from Soo-yeon. "The Seoul board is asking questions about your absence. How long before they decide you're unfit to lead? You're not getting any younger." Seong-min deleted the message without responding. At 52, he was considered an old man in a young man's game. But age had brought him something his younger self never had: perspective. He needed to know if humanity still existed outside the boardroom and the back alley. He needed a reason not to let the syndicate burn to the ground. More than that, he needed to know if anyone could love the man beneath the crown, not the crown itself. That was the night Han Seong-min decided to die, at least the version of him the world knew. He spent hours studying his reflection, learning how to diminish himself. His naturally silver-streaked hair would work perfectly for the disguise. He traded his tailored Italian wool for a stained, oversized hoodie and worn-out jeans. He rubbed dirt into his cuticles and practiced walking with the shuffle of a man beaten down by decades of hardship. He studied videos of homeless individuals, learning their mannerisms, their speech patterns, the way they held themselves when asking for help. At 52, he could convincingly portray a man whose life had taken every wrong turn. He became a ghost, an invisible man in a city of lights. But as he prepared for his test, one question haunted him. What if no one passed? What if the world was exactly as cold as he'd always believed? The restaurant was called Aurum. It was the kind of place where the bread course cost more than a week's groceries for the average person. Gold leaf on the walls, crystal chandeliers that hummed with expensive electricity, and a staff trained to sniff out low-status individuals like bloodhounds. Victor Lemaire, the general manager, was a man who worshipped at the altar of prestige. To him, a customer's value was determined by the watch on their wrist. He'd built his career on exclusion, on making people feel small so that the wealthy felt larger. Renee Washington, however, saw things differently. Renee was a black woman with a grace that couldn't be taught. Her hair was styled in neat, elegant micro-braids pulled back from a face that held a quiet strength. At 28, she'd already survived more than most people twice her age. She'd grown up in the foster care system in Detroit, bouncing between homes that ranged from neglectful to abusive. At 16, she'd aged out with nothing but a high school diploma and a fierce determination to never let anyone else feel invisible the way she had. "You're nobody's priority," her last foster mother had told her. "The sooner you accept that, the easier life gets." Renee had proven her wrong. She'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through culinary school, sleeping in her car between shifts. She'd learned that kindness was a choice, not a luxury, and that dignity couldn't be bought or sold. Now she worked at Aurum because she was a dreamer with a plan. Every tip she earned went into the kitchen table, a dream she was building to provide culinary training for foster kids aging out of the system. She knew what it was like to be ignored by the world, and she refused to let it harden her. Her co-workers thought she was naive. Isabella Cruz, a senior server, often shook her head at Renee's bleeding heart. Thomas Whitaker, a regular customer, had once told Victor that Renee was too soft for fine dining. But Harrison Webb, Aurum's mysterious owner, had seen something different in her. During her interview, he'd asked her one question: "What's the most important ingredient in any meal?" "Hope," Renee had answered without hesitation. "The hope that someone cares enough to nourish you." She'd been hired on the spot. The Tuesday night rush was thinning when the door opened. Renee was wiping down the bar, mentally calculating how much she'd made in tips, enough to buy supplies for the cooking class she taught at the community center on weekends. A man walked in. He looked like he had lived rough for years. His silver hair was matted and unkempt. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who'd seen too much hardship, and his clothes were a tragedy of grey and brown. He walked with the careful shuffle of a man whose body had been broken by life. The silence that hit the room was deafening. Isabella Cruz, a senior server, audibly gasped. Thomas Whitaker, a regular who thought his money bought him the right to be cruel, smirked behind his wineglass. "This should be interesting," Thomas murmured to his dinner companion. "Watch Victor work." Victor Lemaire moved like a viper. "Sir, you are in the wrong place. The shelter is 3 blocks east. Out, now." Seong-min didn't flinch. He looked Victor in the eye, a gaze that had made hardened killers tremble, but he kept his voice soft, shaky, with the tremor of a man who'd been dismissed too many times. "I have money I want to eat." "You have change, and I'm sure," Victor sneered. "But we have a dress code and a dignity code. You're upsetting the guests." Renee was watching from the service station. She saw the way the man held himself. Despite the rags and the obvious hardship, there was something in his posture, a dignity that couldn't be completely erased. She'd learned to read people during her years in foster care. Survival had depended on it. This man wasn't what he appeared to be. She stepped forward before Victor could call security. "Victor, the bar is open seating," Renee said, her voice a calm melody that cut through the tension. "And as long as he can pay the minimum, we serve him. That's the policy you wrote yourself last month, remember?" Victor's face turned a mottled purple. "Renee, don't be a martyr. Look at him." "I am looking at him," she replied, turning to Seong-min. Her eyes met his, and for a moment she felt the world shift. There was intelligence there, pain, and something else, a test being administered. "Follow me, sir." As she led him to the bar, she heard Thomas Whitaker's stage whisper, "There goes Renee, saving another stray. Someone should tell her this isn't a soup kitchen." Renee's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that dignity was maintained through action, not words. Seong-min sat at the polished obsidian bar. He felt the weight of a dozen judgmental stares on his back. He felt electricity sparking between his reality and the persona he was playing. Renee handed him a leather-bound menu. She didn't look at his dirty fingernails or the stains on his clothes. She looked at his eyes. "Tonight's special is a butter-poached Maine lobster with saffron risotto," she said softly. "It's the best thing we make." Seong-min looked at the price, 245s. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of crumpled, dirty $5 and $10 bills. It was barely $80. "I'd like the lobster," he said, his voice carrying just the right amount of hopeful desperation. A laugh erupted from Thomas Whitaker nearby. "Hey, Renee, is the old bum taking up space for a joke? He can't even afford the appetizer." Renee didn't even look at Thomas. She kept her focus on Seong-min. She saw the way his weathered hands trembled, just a little. She saw a man who looked like he was testing the very air he breathed. "I'll put the order in," Renee said. She walked to the computer, her heart hammering not with fear, but with a strange sense of purpose. She knew Victor would check the bill. She knew she'd be fired if he couldn't pay. Renee pulled her own debit card from her apron. She swiped it for the full amount of the lobster, plus a 20% tip for herself so the system wouldn't flag it. It was half of her rent money for the month. When the lobster arrived, it was a masterpiece. Seong-min stared at it. He hadn't eaten in 2 days to make the homeless act authentic. The scent of the saffron and butter filled his senses, but it was the woman standing behind the bar that truly captivated him. "Why did you do it?" Seong-min asked, his voice a bit more steady now. "You know I don't have enough." Renee began polishing a glass, her movements fluid and rhythmic, "because everyone deserves to feel like they matter at least once a day. And because my father once told me that the way you treat someone who can do nothing for you, that's who you really are." Seong-min took a bite. It was the best meal of his life, not because of the chef, but because of the grace with which it was served. The next morning, Victor stormed to Renee's locker. "You paid for him, didn't you?" His face was purple with rage. "I checked the system. Your card, full price." So you're fired, effective immediately. I won't have staff running a charity out of my restaurant." Renee's hands stilled on her apron strings. Half her rent money, gone. Her dream of the kitchen table suddenly further away. "I understand," she said quietly. Victor smirked. "Good. Security will escort." "Mr. Lemaire." The voice belonged to Harrison Webb, Auram's owner, a man who appeared twice a year and controlled everything. He stood in the doorway like a storm cloud. "My office, now." 30 minutes later, Victor emerged, pale and shaken. Renee was officially promoted to assistant manager. That night, Min appeared at the bar again. "I heard what happened," he said, his voice carrying a strange weight. "Why didn't you let them fire you?" Renee continued polishing glasses. "Because doing the right thing isn't conditional on the outcome." "Even when it costs you everything?" She looked up. For a split second, she saw something in his eyes, a hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Especially then," she said. "That's when character matters most." Min reached across the bar. This time, he didn't stop before touching her hand. His fingers were softer than they should be for a homeless man, and there was a strength there that spoke of a different life. "You're dangerous, Renee Washington." "How so?" "You make people want to be worthy of you." For the next 2 weeks, the homeless man became a fixture at the Auram bar. He didn't always order lobster. Sometimes it was just tea. But he always came when Renee was working. They talked in the quiet gaps between rushes. He told her his name was Min. He told her he was a man who had lost his way in the dark. On the 3rd night, Renee brought him a bowl of soup she'd made herself. "It's not on the menu," she said. "My grandmother's recipe. She used to say that food made with love could heal anything." Min took a spoonful and closed his eyes. Tell me about her. She raised me until I was 7, Renee said, settling into the rhythm of conversation that had become natural between them. She was a cook at a church in Detroit. Never had much money, but her kitchen was always full of people who needed feeding. What happened to her? Cancer. I went into foster care after that. Renee's voice didn't waver, but Min saw the pain flash across her face. Bounced around until I aged out, but she taught me something important before she died. What's that? That love isn't about what you have, it's about what you give. Min studied her face in the soft bar lighting. At 52, he'd met thousands of people, but none like her. You could have become bitter. I could have, Renee agreed. Some days I wanted to. But bitterness is just pain that's given up hope, and I refuse to give up hope. On the 5th night, Min asked about her dreams. I want to open a culinary school for foster kids, Renee said, her eyes lighting up. Not just cooking, life skills, how to budget, how to interview for jobs, how to believe they're worth something. I was lucky. I had teachers who saw potential in me, but so many kids age out with nothing. How much would something like that cost? Renee laughed, but there was sadness in it. More than I'll probably ever have. But I'm saving. Every tip, every extra shift. Maybe someday. Min was quiet for a long moment. You're building something beautiful. I'm trying to. On the 7th night, the conversation turned more personal. What about you, Min? Renee asked. What did you do before you lost your way? Seong-min had prepared for this question, but looking into her eyes, the rehearsed answer felt like poison. I was in business, he said carefully, family business. But I realized I was building something ugly instead of something beautiful. What kind of business? The kind that takes more than it gives. Renee nodded, understanding without needing details. My foster father was like that. He took kids for the state money, gave nothing back. I used to wonder how people could live with themselves. Maybe they tell themselves they don't have a choice. There's always a choice, Renee said firmly. It might not be easy, but there's always a choice. Seong-min felt something crack inside his chest. At 52, he'd spent decades telling himself exactly that he didn't have choices. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point? On the 10th night, Min asked the question that had been haunting him. Renee, do you think people can change? Really change? Even at my age? She was quiet for a moment, considering. I think people can choose to become who they were meant to be instead of who they were forced to be, but it takes courage, and it's never too late. My grandmother used to say that every sunrise is a second chance. What if they've done terrible things? Then they have to live with that. But they also have to decide what they're going to do next. The past doesn't have to be a prison unless you let it be. Min reached across the bar and took her hand. This time she didn't pull away. You're not what I thought, Seong-min said one night. You're a light, Renee. I'm just a person, Min, she said, interlacing her fingers with his. Her skin tingled at the contact. There was a strength in his hand that didn't match his clothes, and calluses that spoke of a different kind of work than she'd imagined. The world is just a bit too dark sometimes. We have to keep each other warm. But even as they grew closer, Renee began to notice inconsistencies. Min never smelled like someone who lived on the streets. His teeth were too clean, too well maintained. His posture, when he forgot to slouch, was too confident. And his hands, those hands that had never done manual labor. 3 blocks away, Park Jin-ho lowered his surveillance camera. The target has been meeting with the same woman for 12 days, he reported to Choi Dae-sung. Every evening, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., she pays for his meals. A woman? Dae-sung's eyes narrowed. Show me. Jin-ho pulled up the photos. Renee laughing at something Min had said. Renee touching his hand across the bar. Renee walking him to the door like she was saying goodbye to someone precious. He's lost his mind, Dae-sung said. The great Han Seong-min, reduced to begging from a waitress. At 52, he should be planning his legacy, not playing dress-up. But Jin-ho wasn't convinced. He'd worked for Seong-min for 15 years. The man in those photos moved like their boss, held himself like their boss. What if it's not what it looks like? Jin-ho asked. Then we wait and watch. But if Han Seong-min has truly fallen this far? Dae-sung smiled coldly. The Han Syndicate deserves a younger, stronger leader. Back at Orem, Renee was closing up when she noticed something odd. The homeless man, Min, never asked to use the bathroom, never begged for money beyond the meal, never showed signs of substance abuse or mental illness. She pulled out her phone and Googled Korean homeless Las Vegas. Nothing. She tried Korean missing persons Las Vegas. Still nothing. Then, almost as a joke, she searched Korean Mafia Las Vegas. Her breath caught. The first article showed a grainy photo of a man in an expensive suit. The face was partially hidden, but the hands, those same well-maintained hands she'd been holding, were visible. Renee's phone slipped from her fingers. The next evening, when Min appeared at his usual spot, Renee studied his face differently. Beneath the fake grime and carefully disheveled hair, she saw the bone structure, the way he held his shoulders, the unconscious authority in his voice when he said, "Please" and "Thank you." "Min," she said carefully. "Yes." "What's your last name?" For the first time since she'd known him, he hesitated. "Does it matter?" he asked. "It might." He looked into her eyes, really looked, and she saw the exact moment he realized she knew. "It's Han," he said quietly. Renee felt the world shift beneath her feet. Everything suddenly made sense, and nothing made sense at all. The morning of the final confrontation, Renee didn't show up for work. Seong-min waited at the bar, still in his homeless disguise, checking his watch every 30 seconds. She knew. He could tell by the way she'd looked at him the night before, like she was seeing a ghost. Isabella Cruz approached nervously. "She called in sick," she whispered. "But Victor's planning something. He called the police, and there are men in suits who've been watching the restaurant all morning." Seong-min's blood went cold. Jin-ho and Dae-sung had found him. At that exact moment, Renee was standing in the bathroom of her apartment, staring at her reflection. On her phone was a news article. Korean crime lord Han Seong-min, wanted by Interpol for money laundering, extortion and conspiracy. Below that, another search result. Han Syndicate Lieutenant Park Jin-ho offers $2 million reward for information on boss's location. $2 million, enough to fund the kitchen table for 10 years, enough to save hundreds of foster kids. All she had to do was make one phone call. Her hands shook as she dialed. The number went straight to a professional voicemail. "This is Park Jin-ho. Leave a message. This is Renee Washington. I work at Orem Restaurant in Las Vegas. I have information about Han Seong-min." She hung up before she could say more. 5 minutes later, Jin-ho called back. "Ms. Washington, you mentioned Han Seong-min. What information?" Renee closed her eyes. "He's been coming to my restaurant for 2 weeks, disguised as a homeless man. He'll be there tonight at 7. "You're certain it's him?" "Yes. The reward will be transferred immediately. Thank you for your civic duty." Renee ended the call and immediately vomited. By 6 p.m. she was running through the streets toward Orem, her heart pounding with a terror she'd never felt before. What had she done? She burst through the restaurant doors just as Victor was on the phone with police. "He's not a vagrant," she shouted. "He's dangerous. You need to call this off." But it was too late. 3 police cars were already pulling up outside, and across the street, 2 black sedans with tinted windows waited like predators. Seong-min sat calmly at the bar, watching everything unfold through the reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. He'd spotted Jin-ho's men an hour ago. He knew about the police. He could have left at any time, but he stayed. When Renee ran toward him, her face streaked with tears, he understood. "You called them," he said. It wasn't a question. "The reward," she whispered. "I thought, God, what have I done?" "You chose what you believed was right," Seong-min said quietly, pain flashing in his eyes. "Even though it meant betraying someone you cared about. That takes courage." "What?" "You passed the test, Renee. Even when you thought I was a criminal who'd lied to you, you still chose the greater good. You're still pure." The police burst through the door, but they weren't alone. Jin-ho and Dae-sung entered with them, their faces cold and professional. Han Seong-min, Jin-ho announced. You're under arrest for... Actually, Seong-min interrupted, standing slowly. I don't think so. Renee stood in front of Seong-min, her eyes flashing with defiant beauty. He hasn't done anything wrong, she shouted. I've paid for every meal he couldn't. He stays or I walk and I'll take the health code violations I've been logging for 6 months with me. Victor froze. The police hesitated, but Jin-ho wasn't deterred. Ma'am, step aside. This man is wanted by international authorities. For what? Renee demanded. Eating dinner? Talking to me? What crime has he committed in this restaurant? He's the head of a criminal organization. Prove it, Renee said firmly. Right here, right now. Show me one illegal thing he's done in this building. Jin-ho's confidence wavered. They had surveillance photos, but no evidence of criminal activity at Orem. Seong-min stood up. He didn't shuffle this time. He stood at his full, imposing height, a man who commanded respect despite his 52 years. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket and pressed a single button. Now, he said. Within seconds, 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of Orem. A dozen men in sharp black suits flooded the restaurant, but these weren't Jin-ho's men. These were Seong-min's personal security team, led by Kim Woo-jin, his most trusted bodyguard. Boss, Woo-jin said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute loyalty. Are you ready? Park Jin-ho and Choi Dae-sung's faces went pale when they realized they'd been outmaneuvered. The restaurant went bone-chillingly silent. Thomas Whitaker dropped his fork. Victor Lemaire looked like he was about to faint. Seong-min stripped off the dirty hoodie, revealing a body that was still powerful despite his age, marked with the intricate dark tattoos of his heritage. The silver in his hair caught the restaurant's golden light. One of his men handed him a charcoal grey suit jacket. He put it on, and in an instant, the homeless man vanished. In his place stood the king of the Han Syndicate, older, wiser, and more dangerous than ever. But instead of addressing Jin-ho or the police, he walked over to Victor. You wanted to know about my dignity code. Seong-min's voice was like silk over a blade, carrying the authority of decades of command. My dignity isn't in my clothes, it's in my word, and my word is that you are finished in this city. He turned to Jin-ho and Dae-sung. As for you two, Seong-min said, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire, you're fired, effective immediately. Woo-jin, escort them out. If they resist, call their wives and tell them to start packing. The reward money never came. Jin-ho's dismissal had cancelled all his promises. Jin-ho stepped forward. You can't. I can, Seong-min said quietly. And I just did. The Han Syndicate is mine until I say otherwise, and I say you're done. He turned to the police officers, who looked confused and out of their depth. Officers, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm a legitimate businessman who was conducting a social experiment. No laws have been broken. But if you'd like to verify my legal status, my attorney Leonard Hayes is on speed dial. The lead officer looked at the chaos around him. The suited men, the obvious power dynamics, the complete lack of evidence of any crime, and made the smart choice. We'll be in touch if we need anything else, he said, leading his team out. Finally, Seong-min turned to Renee. She was trembling, her eyes wide. Min? My name is Han Seong-min, he said. He reached out and held her chin softly, forcing her to look into his eyes. And everything I told you about being lost in the dark was true, until I met you. The next morning, the legal world of Las Vegas and Seoul was set on fire. Seong-min sat in his penthouse with Leonard Hayes. The lawyer's usually composed demeanor was cracked with disbelief. You're serious? The lawyer asked. You're transferring ownership of the Orem property, the 3 adjacent blocks, and 60% of your personal holdings to a waitress? She isn't just a waitress, Seong-min said, looking at a photo of Renee he had taken from afar. She's the only person who saw me when I was invisible. She's the only person who passed the test. Leonard shuffled through the papers. Seong-min, this is approximately $2 billion in assets. The Seoul board will never... The Seoul board works for me, not the other way around, Seong-min interrupted. And they'll accept my decision or find new employment. At 52, I've earned the right to choose my own legacy. But the implications are exactly what I intend them to be. I'm restructuring everything, Leonard. The Han Syndicate becomes a legitimate holding company. All shadow operations cease within 6 months. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with you. Leonard stared at his client. What happened to you in that restaurant? I remembered who I wanted to be before the world taught me who I had to be. An hour later, Seong-min called Renee to the penthouse. When she arrived, she looked at the luxury around her with a shocked but steady gaze. She wasn't impressed by the gold. She was mourning the man she thought she knew. Why the lie? She asked. I needed to know if there was anyone left who didn't want a piece of my crown, he replied. I found you. I'm rewriting my will, Renee, but I'm also rewriting my life. I'm stepping down. I'm turning the syndicate into a legitimate holding company, and I want you to have what I've built. He handed her the papers. Renee stared at the documents, her hands shaking. I didn't ask for this, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I know, he said, that's why you're the only one I trust with it. But I don't know anything about running businesses this size, but I know right from wrong, and I'm a fast learner. You're just the woman who paid for a stranger's meal with her rent money, Seong-min said softly. You're just the woman who stood up to police officers to protect someone she thought was a criminal. You're just the woman who sees potential in throwaway kids because someone once saw potential in you. Renee looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You asked me once why I ordered the lobster when I couldn't pay, Seong-min continued, and I wanted to see if you'd treat a beggar like a king, he whispered, placing a hand on his chest right over his heart. You did. And now I want to see if you'll let this king show you what it's like to be loved by a man who finally has something worth living for. Renee looked at the documents, then at the man who had turned her world upside down. You posed as homeless, ordered lobster, and my kindness made a Korean mafia boss rewrite his will, she said, understanding the magnitude of what had happened. Is that a yes? Seong-min asked. That's a yes to partnership, Renee said firmly. Both business and personal. But I have conditions. Name them. The kitchen table gets full funding, no questions asked. Every illegal operation gets shut down within 6 months. And you, Thas, she reached out and touched the scar on his neck. You let me help you become the man your brother wanted you to be. Seong-min closed his eyes at her touch. For the first time in 20 years, he felt peace. But the transformation wouldn't be easy, and time was running out in ways Seong-min hadn't anticipated. Over the next few months, Seong-min faced resistance from every corner of his empire, while secretly battling a failing heart. The chest pains had been getting worse, but Seong-min ignored them. At 52, he had more important things to worry about than his failing body. The decades of stress, violence, and the weight of command had taken their toll. His doctors had been clear. His time was limited. He didn't tell Renee about the diagnosis. Instead, he spent his remaining months reorganizing his businesses, legitimizing operations, and ensuring that his legacy would be in the hands of the only person who had seen his humanity when he was invisible. 3 board members resigned in protest. 2 lieutenants attempted a coup that was quickly squashed by Woo Jin's security team. The Seoul Council demanded a face-to-face meeting to assess his mental fitness. He's 52, one council member argued. Past his prime, this foundation nonsense is proof he's lost his edge. His edge built this empire, Woo Jin had replied coldly. Question his decisions again and you'll see how sharp it still is. Through it all, Renee stood beside him, learning the business with the same determination she'd brought to everything else in her life. She sat in on board meetings, asking questions that cut to the heart of ethical concerns. She reviewed every contract, every deal, every partnership with fresh eyes. This shipping company, she said one afternoon, pointing to a contract, what exactly do they ship? Leonard Hayes cleared his throat uncomfortably. Legitimate cargo, mostly. Mostly? There may be some. Gray area shipments. Then we're out, Renee said firmly. Find a different shipping company. But the profit margins? I don't care about the profit margins. Find a different company. Seong-min watched her with growing admiration and deepening love. She wasn't just changing his business, she was changing him. But he knew their time together was precious and limited. On a cold December evening, as snow began to fall over Las Vegas, a rare and beautiful sight, Seong-min visited Renee one last time at Aurum. She was closing, as always, with the same grace that had captivated him months before. "Min," she said, smiling as she saw him. She'd grown comfortable using his real name in private. "You look tired. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm at peace," he replied, and it was true. "Renee, I want you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. You showed me who I could have been." She frowned, worried by the tone of finality in his voice. "Why are you talking like this?" "Because sometimes we need to say the important things before it's too late," he said, taking her hands in his. "You are a light in this world, Renee Washington. Never let anyone dim that light." He kissed her softly on the forehead, a gesture filled with all the love and gratitude he couldn't put into words. "I love you," he whispered. "Thank you for saving me." That night, Seong-min died peacefully in his sleep, at the age of 52. The funeral of Seong-min was an event that shook both the legitimate world and the underworld. Businessmen, politicians, and shadowy figures attended to pay their last respects to the man who had built an empire. Renee arrived wearing a simple black dress, carrying a single white rose. She didn't know most of the people there, and they didn't know her. To the attendees, she was just another mourner paying her respects. But when attorney Leonard Hayes called her aside for a private conversation after the service, her world changed forever. "Ms. Washington," Leonard said, handing her a sealed envelope. "Seong-min left this for you, along with very specific instructions." Inside the envelope was a letter written in his careful handwriting. "My dearest Renee, if you are reading this, it means my journey has come to an end. Please don't grieve for me. For the first time in decades, I die at peace. You asked me once why I ordered that lobster when I couldn't pay for it. The truth is, I was testing the world, searching for one person who still possessed genuine kindness. You didn't just pass that test, you taught me that hope still existed. That's why I'm leaving everything to you. Not because you asked for it, but because you never did. Not because you knew who I was, but because you saw me when I was invisible. Use this inheritance to build the world you dream of. Help the children the system has abandoned. Be the light for others that you were for me. You saved me, Renee Washington. Now save others. With eternal love and gratitude, Seong-min P.S. That lobster really was the best meal of my life, not because of the taste, but because of the grace with which it was served." Renee read the letter 3 times before the words truly sank in. Leonard explained the details. She had inherited properties worth billions, legitimate businesses, bank accounts in multiple countries. "He really did it," she whispered, still in shock. "He spent months planning this," Leonard confirmed. "He said, you were the only person who treated him with dignity when he had nothing to offer." That night, Renee returned to the cemetery alone. She knelt before the simple headstone that read, Seong-min, brother, uncle, man of honor. "You really did it," she whispered to the stone. "A man I served lobster became this." The night wind carried her words across the silent cemetery. "I promise I won't waste this," she said. "I'll build something beautiful with what you left me. I'll help every child I can. I'll make you proud." She placed the white rose on his grave and walked away. In the years that followed, Renee Washington used her inheritance to revolutionize the foster care system. She opened schools, created job training programs, and established a fund that ensured no child aged out of the system without resources. But she never forgot the man who had changed her life with a simple request for lobster. And whenever someone asked how she had acquired her fortune, she would smile and say, "A stranger taught me that kindness is the most valuable currency in the world." The story of Seong-min and Renee Washington became legend, proof that sometimes a single act of compassion can rewrite not just a will, but the destiny of countless lives. And it all started with a 52-year-old man who had everything but meaning, a homeless disguise, a lobster, and a woman who chose to see dignity where others saw only desperation. At 52, Seong-min had finally learned that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be.